The conflict against Iran was inevitably going to potentially trigger and accelerate the terrorism proxies that operate around the world that have been directly financed and supported by Iran. And these groups range from Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hezbollah in Iran, the Houthis in the Yemen, and various individuals and groups that have managed to infiltrate into various countries across Europe, including the United Kingdom and the United States. And we know that Iran has provided financing even to groups like Hamas, who were responsible for the October 7th attacks, as we know, but also Al-Qaeda and some of its derivative elements and strands. Now, as a direct result, we don't just have organized terrorism groups like Hezbollah, for example, and Hamas and the Houthis, but we have disenchanted, disenfranchised individuals and smaller groups that again have been supported by Al-Quds, the Muslim Brotherhood, and other affiliated conduits between Iran and terrorism activity. And what we've seen as a result of this is the threat levels in Europe have increased significantly to being designated generically by Europol as high, whereas in the United Kingdom it is still substantial, meaning that a threat or an attack is likely. The United States have seen a series of an increase in anti-Semitism, both online and in terms of some actions. And even ourselves here in the United Kingdom saw the attack against a North London ambulance service that is used by the Israel and Jewish community that were firebombed and burnt out, which was initially tagged as a hate crime, but counterterrorism police have now been involved, which could mean that we could see more of these types of incidents occurring, whereas it's moving from the rhetoric online of hate speech to direct actions by individuals, groups, or even organized groups. One of the biggest concerns is that our government here in the United Kingdom hasn't really been generating or aggregating any specific data on associated attacks that have happened in communities by individuals that would be deemed as illegal immigrants. And as a direct result of that, it's very difficult to differentiate between indigenous or nationals to foreign nationals who have only recently joined the country or arrived in this country by illicit and illegal means. But that's not to say that MI5, our domestic terrorism agency, counterterrorism agency, is not working on approximately 75% of caseloads against far extremism and Islamic extremism groups than it is on domestic far-right terrorism. The sort of attacks that we could see materializing out of either a successful or failed ceasefire agreement, if one can be met with Iran, could be isolated individuals, the lone actors or lone wolves, as some people may term them. And these individuals will look to carry out that attack in such a way that they will also want to know, or for it to be known, that they are associated to a political agenda or a particular state agenda. Now, that could be Al-Qaeda, it could be Hamas, it could be the Houthis, it could be Hezbollah. But again, there is far more surreptitious ways that attacks can also be undertaken, from sabotage, kidnapping, through to cyber attacks. And we know that Iran has been responsible for financing certain kidnappings and extortions here in the United Kingdom. Cyber attacks have certainly upsurged across the United Kingdom, Europe, and also the United States, and will continue to do so whilst the allies, if you want to call us, are aligned to America in this conflict in Iran. The evolution of terrorism over the last 20 years has become more atomized. And so what we have is less of a larger group trying to plan big spectaculars like 9/11, but that's not to say that a 9/11 or a 7/7 isn't necessarily in the planning by those major groups, but we're also looking at lone actors. And we're looking at individuals which could often be termed as a person suffering from mental illness. Now, I think that's disingenuous because ultimately, when one goes back and researches, as inevitably the authorities do in the wake of an attack, whether it be a stabbing on the street, whether it be a improvised explosive device, if they find or attribute that individual to any kind of terrorism propaganda, documentation, communications, that is a terrorist. You know, it's like if it barks and it wags its tail, it's a dog. And you can't dress it up as anything else. Whether there was some mental illness involved or not is somewhat irrelevant. But also it's a moot point because ultimately many people who suffer from mental illness are more likely to be passive than they are necessarily to be aggressive. So one has to look at the motivating force behind that individual, regardless of their state of mind. Iran can support its proxies in a number of different ways. It can support them with weaponry, with finance, with even teaching or instruction and teaching individuals how to carry out a terrorist attack, what are the key line features of that terrorist attack and what it should achieve, but even the mechanics of how to build or construct an IED for that matter. How much Iran can support its proxies in the field, so to speak, will come down to how accessible and how easy they can do that. Now, one of my greatest concerns that I have had, certainly for the last decade, with the increase of illegal individuals coming into the UK and either being smuggled or simply crossing the channel into the UK, is that it's highly unlikely that it would simply be people being trafficked, and that within the cargoes of those boats, those dinghies, very likely there's going to be contraband of various different types, whether it be components to building an IED, whether it be explosives itself, whether it be firearms, ammunition, or various other items that could contribute to an individual wanting to carry out a terrorism attack, and certainly being conscious of the fact that terrorists and intended terrorists are very conscious these days of being potentially tracked through ordering online, of going to hardware stores and buying those components in a conventional sense. One of the things that's really sadly lacking and disappointing from our current government is their lack of transparency. And the general public are a heck of a lot wiser than they used to be. And with the proliferation of social media, information moves incredibly fast. And assessment, analysis, whether that be qualified or otherwise, will equally move extremely fast. And it is of the government's responsibility to keep control of that narrative or control of exactly what the truth is that's going on behind the scenes. So to disassociate from theories which are out there without providing credible evidence to do so makes it incredibly difficult for the general public to trust the government, and will be the quickest way for them to lose control. So the first thing that the government needs to do is keep the British public informed as to what they are doing, what our state of threat actually is, what we can do to contribute to support and to assist, whether it be reporting information over and beyond the standardized sort of messages of reporting through to authorities, how members of the general public can do this in a productive sense. It has been known for many, many years with police agencies, counterterrorism agencies across the world, that one of the most valuable sources of intelligence comes from the general public. And it is down to the government to promote in a positive sense, supported by their transparency, that the general public need to look for particular indicators, certain bits of information, which could or may not provide a valuable piece of the intelligence picture that helps the authorities to intercept and foil what could be a potential terrorist plot. But underlying this all is the fact that we need to trust the government is there to serve us and to support us. And at the moment, there is way too much ambiguity in them not necessarily showing either support for our most important allies or be support to us as the electorate in giving us a clear picture of what we're currently dealing with.